Harvey Milk. 1, 2, skip a few. Understanding leftist ideology. Let's try understanding history through the lens of political ideologies and divisiveness as a tool. Introduction. I can't think of a name I've heard more in my research than that of Harvey Milk, other than Angela Davis, rightfully so, who later, in researching for this project, her name did come up, even in my personal readings such as The Education of a Coroner by John Bateson, or The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. Forgive me if I said that wrong. His name finds a place, the latter being less surprising when you know the context of the story, but nonetheless worth noting. Harvey Milk was an American politician and one of the first openly gay elected officials. The year after he was elected to San Francisco's Board of Supervisors, he was assassinated, after which he was labeled a gay rights icon and therefore memorialized for his role in history. The editors of Encyclopedia Britannica 2018. Even if you know little of him, it's easy to see his impact by the number of times he's mentioned in literature and film. Biography. Harvey Bernard Milk was born on the 22nd of May in 1930. Born and raised in New York, he acknowledged his homosexuality but pursued sexual relationships secretly, even into adulthood. Wikipedia Contributors 2019a. This is because historically and statistically, being homosexual has meant danger. Here are a few sources listed: Death Penalty Information Center 2024, Espinoza 2025, Federal Research Division of the Library of Congress 2023, Human Dignity Trust 2025, and Wikipedia Contributors 2025a. The counterculture of the 1960s allowed Milk to move away from many of his conservative views on sexual expression and individual freedoms. Wikipedia Contributors 2019a. Milk graduated from New York State College for Teachers in Albany in 1951. After that, he served in the Navy during the Korean War. He received an other than honorable discharge due to engaging in sexual contact with other enlisted men rather than be court-martialed, after which he held a number of different jobs and eventually became a financial analyst in New York. He moved to San Francisco in 1972, where he opened a camera store, the editors of Encyclopedia Britannica 2018. He had settled in the Castro, which was a neighborhood that had been experiencing high levels of immigration by gay men and lesbians. Wikipedia Contributors 2019a. He soon gained a following and then became a pillar within the gay community there. He challenged the city's gay leadership, thinking it too conservative in its attempts to gain rights for homosexuals. This led to his popularity growing. In 1973, Harvey Milk ran for a seat on the city's Board of Supervisors and lost. Following another unsuccessful attempt in 1976, he was elected in 1977. The editors of Encyclopedia Britannica 2018. He led gay rights movements against anti-gay initiatives, and during the 11 months that he was in office, he sponsored a bill banning discrimination based on sexual orientation in employment, housing, and public accommodations. The supervisors passed the bill 11-1, and Mayor George Moscone signed it into law. Wikipedia Contributors 2019a. The year after he was elected, Milk, along with the city's mayor, Moscone, was shot and killed in City Hall by Dan White. Dan White was a former city supervisor and a conservative, editors of Encyclopedia Britannica 2018. He was also the person who cast the sole vote against Milk's bill. Wikipedia Contributors 2019a. I found that last bit especially important to mention because at the trial, White's attorneys won based on the argument that White had been suffering from impaired judgment due to prolonged clinical depression. White was convicted of voluntary manslaughter, which led to rioting. He was sentenced to 7 years and 8 months, but was let out after only 5. The editors of Encyclopedia Britannica 2018. Although Milk's political career was short, he was considered an icon and a martyr in the LGBTQ community, and in 2009, Harvey Milk received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Rodwell in the Mattachine Society. Forgive me if I said that word wrong as well. For a time, Milk was also romantically involved with a man named Craig Rodwell. However, Milk was afraid of Craig's enticement of the police. It would be safe to assume that Milk believed the avenues through which we achieve sovereignty to be through the channels that the oppressors subjugate. Essentially, that through policy alone, we will achieve rights for everyone. Wikipedia Contributors 2019a. I won't argue that voting is useless, and I don't believe that having city planning or leadership is a bad thing. Some people and some movements need defined leaders. I do, however, find that pieces are missing in that movement or belief system that are tied more closely to other ideologies. It's just also odd because many of the members of the Mattachine Society cooperated with police and preferred to adhere to the law because they also believed in seeking change within the system. So you'd think they'd actually see eye to eye a bit more, but Yelzadeh 2020. Forgive me if I said the author's name wrong as well. Now seems like a good time for a friendly reminder. Peaceful protesting only works if the group you're trying to enlighten has empathy. The Mattachine Society was a secret organization founded sometime in 1950 to 1951 in Los Angeles by gay rights activist Harry Hay. Hay's introduction to developing human rights movement began at the Communist Party of the United States of America, Yelzadeh 2018. Hay believed that homosexuals should see themselves as members of an oppressed minority entitled to equal rights. For a moment, try to imagine a world where not a single person is allowed to marry for the reasons they want to, and the government got to choose who every single person was allowed to be with. That would be seen as oppressive, right? The name Mattachine came from the medieval French group Société Mattachine, who were a group of masked dancers that made satire of social conventions. The organization viewed religion, psychiatry, and the government as oppressive forces. I'm going to play devil's advocate here really quick, by which I mean I'm going to take a closer look at this from both perspectives, but to someone who has faced the forced submission at the hands of the church, the quiet removal from the views of being deemed mentally ill, and otherwise boxed in from societal proceedings from the works of the government, it would absolutely make sense to view it that way. At the same time, I can understand that the people who found resolution in God's hands, healing through the means of being diagnosed, and not found visible oppression from the works of the government, it would logically make sense to view this as a slight. Your view on the world is shaped not only by your people, but by everything you experience and don't experience. As a matter of perspective, the only way to come to similar terms is for both people to be willing and care enough about the things their neighbor has faced while also not shutting down the other person's experience just because they don't share in it. Two people can experience drastically different things from the same institutions, and that doesn't mean either one is wrong for liking or disliking those spaces. However, I would be remiss not to mention that while wanting those spaces to make you feel good and accepted is completely okay, we have to recognize that everyone is deserving of those spaces. And if my neighbor is not welcome at my church, I am not welcome because I love my neighbor as myself. The society helped develop the framework for further pursuit of gay rights. Hay left the organization in 1953, and eventually the group became split over the topic of maintaining approval and those who advocated for a more radical approach. Yalzadeh 2020. The last of my mentions of this group will be Craig Rodwell, ending where we started. Rodwell was aiming to bring new energy into the Mattachine Society. He even created the Mattachine Young Adults, which raised membership numbers and brought in more militant friends of Rodwell's into leadership with the organization. In late 1967, he opened the Oscar Wilde Memorial Bookshop, which was a bookstore dedicated to the serious writings of gay authors. And in June 1993, Rodwell passed away from stomach cancer. Manuscripts and Archives Division, the New York Public Library, no date. Leftist ideology. I want to start this off by noting a few things. The first thing is, obviously, this research will never be comprehensive. It is not my PhD thesis, and even if it were, the political spectrum is constantly changing. Many political ideologists' beliefs are completely different than what they were when they started out. Therefore, I cannot, in a short period of research, provide a complete profile. Secondly, this is not a set of comprehensive beliefs for every leftist or the determining characteristics thereof. There are bad people in every corner of the world, and some leftists, just like with any other affiliation you run into, will be insufferable. That's just a personality thing, not a world structure thing, typically. Nevertheless, the goal here is an attempt at understanding brief moments in history better by providing some information or a political foundation to use as a jumping off point. That being said, I will attempt to describe within this following section historical leftism, leftism versus liberalism, and left versus right ideologies. Historical leftism. What is considered right-wing or left-wing is dependent upon the political climate of the current time and place. Towards the end of the 18th century, the first liberal democracies were created, and the left meant liberalism in the United States. In France, at the same time, the term left meant republicanism because it supported a less hierarchical set of policies than the right-wing traditional conservatives and monarchists. In modern times, the term left is used to describe the ideologies and movements of classical liberalism and democracy in the economic sphere. Wikipedia Contributors 2026. Based upon the historical context, the current political sphere doesn't really place much viewing time into what we'd consider a truly left leaning party or candidate. The closest we've gotten is actually more centrist, although many consider it center left or leftist because as the pendulum swings to extremes, and much like France in the 18th century, center and even right wing can seem left to someone already under far right rule. Pausing here for a moment, let's reflect and remember that many pieces of information in the modern sphere are incredibly politically divisive. That's not what I'm aiming for in this writing. It is ever unfortunate that we have to be hypervigilant, but nonetheless we do. Continuing, I think there are policies from each, but not all, ideology that make a lot of sense. Ideologies that I wouldn't lead into having sensible policies are totalitarianism, fascism, plutocratic, and other forms of rule that don't take into account people from all walks of life and tend to place very little, if any, value into protecting a world or society outside of the structure as it pertains to lining their pockets further. The difference between leftism and liberalism. Often in modern media, people would describe liberalism and leftism as the same thing. However, they vary in important ways. In the United States, a lot of political discourse would find the liberals are more in alignment and support of the Democratic Party, yet many leftists are critical of the party. While liberals and leftists both fall on the left wing on the political spectrum outside of wanting social progress, civil rights, and a more equitable society, the similarities end. Liberalist beliefs tend to fall into alignment with capitalism, but they favor regulation, environmental protection, and a stronger social safety net. They support universal health care, gun control, and higher minimum wages. Most of these ideas align with center left or left leaning ideologies, however, leftists tend to advocate for a more radical or otherwise drastic change. They are against capitalism, even advocating in some ways for collective ownership or potentially a stateless society. Many leftist beliefs draw from socialism, anarchism, or Marxism on the critiques of the capitalist systems. Liberals tend to work within the existing system and aim to improve through reform, and leftists want to change the system completely, essentially the reformist versus the revolutionary. During the Cold War, liberals made effort to distance themselves and make apparent the divide between them and other leftists. This continues to affect how people talk about these two terms even today. In case it will help anyone with clarification, liberals tend to include Democrats and social liberals like Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, or Joe Biden, and leftists tend to identify with labor leaders or democratic socialists like Bernie Sanders, Angela Davis, or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, forgive me if I said her name wrong, but can vary depending on the issue. Many liberals believe change is brought about through emphasis on legislation, elections, and peaceful protest. Leftists may believe in direct action like worker strikes or civil disobedience. Some may agree with political violence in an extreme case, but most do not. Faywick, 2025. Keep in mind this is also the case for right-wing extremists, and remember that political violence is perpetrated by many different people across a long period of time. And if you disagree with it on one side, you must disagree with it on all sides, or else that's hypocritical. Wikipedia Contributors 2025b. Left versus right-leaning ideology. Here is where we will see a bigger gap in similarities, but remember again this is an educational piece and not an attempt to incite argument. If you have historical context, lived experience, or other more tangible forms of adding to the conversation, please do, but if you intend to use facts, quote unquote, framed loosely, or misrepresent data to skew or deliberately turn the conversation to a harsh or hateful tone, I will not allow it. Say I'm silencing you if you want, but I won't allow hatred in an educational space. This is not an echo chamber, it is a room for civil debate. Types of right wing movements today. Conservatism. The main beliefs of conservatism are promotion of the nuclear family, organized religion, military, nation state, property rights, rule of law, aristocracy, and monarchy. Forgive me if I say any of those words wrong. I'm not the best at pronouncing things. Remember, these things change dependent upon the nation and the civilization in which it appears. Wikipedia contributors 2019 F. So, breaking this down, conservatives claim to value the household unit of two parents and their children, structured systems of belief through formal leadership and moral guidance, a protecting force, a sovereign state with citizens that are relatively homogenous, the privilege to own and sell assets, everyone accountable to the same laws, and hereditary titles. Capitalism. An economic system based on private ownership and means of production with the main purpose of obtaining profit. Noticed for several elements, including profit motive, which drives profit incentives, private property, competitive markets, commodification, wage labor, innovation, and economic growth. Different forms of capitalism include variations in the degree of free markets and public ownership, as well as the role of intervention and regulation. Wikipedia contributors 2019b. This one is a little more complicated, and because I won't be taking the time to go into every distinct version of capitalism, we're going to take a very broad blanket statement and say this boils down to profit over people. I know there's more nuance than that, but for the purposes of keeping things moving, please bear with me in attempts to stimulate critical thinking. Nationalism. An ideology in which belief therein holds that a nation should be congruent with the state. In this context, the word state is used to mean a political entity that regulates society and the population within a set territory. Its aim is to build a single national identity in the combination of shared social characteristics, including culture, ethnicity, homeland, language, politics and government, religion, traditions, shared belief in a singular version of history, and national unity or solidarity. Wikipedia contributors 2019 D. Forgive me if I misinterpret this, but essentially it seems that under this ideology, if you make everyone the same, i.e., have them think the same, act the same, look the same, then categorize everyone into a box and force them not to move outside of those boxes, that nationalists believe it will lead to less fighting. Populism. This ideology as a concept has been regarded as anti-political sentiment and as such has been applied to varying movements, parties, and politicians. Wikipedia contributors 2019 G. Britannica describes it as a political movement that claims to champion the common person as opposed to the perceived elites. It tends to combine the elements of the left and the right, Munro 2018. Basically, this one is hard to define, but the common consensus is that the belief system places power back on the people. A little confusing where it fits into either side, but important to note nonetheless. Potential pros and cons / questions. Number one, citizens that are relatively homogenous. When does this become eugenics? I'm not saying that right off the bat wanting to be around people like you is a ridiculous thing. You want to be around the people that agree with you. But is there a point, and if so, at what point does that become hating immigrants, disabled people, LGBTQ persons, etc.? Then, if and when it does reach that point, number two, when the military force that you backed ends up creating disabled veterans, what value do you place on those people? They're no longer generating revenue, often, and under ideologies like capitalism, that's detrimental. So, under these ideologies, are people not allowed to be a drain on resources, or are they still viewed as people who deserve care and compassion because they fought for our country to be safe? Number three, if we choose to fall under hereditary titles of government and the rule of law at the same time, what happens when a family line has been exploiting its people? Essentially, just for a moment, think of the potential flaws there might be in not being able to determine an elected leader. While many feel they don't have a choice in modern times, we continue to retain the option for a write in. We still have some form of decision that we are allowed to make, and when we make the wrong one, we have the privilege of learning from it. When you take too many decisions out of people's hands, it seems almost as if they're being prepped for blind obedience. I see a lot of value in the household unit and an emphasis on teaching children to grow up to be good people with strong structural communities. I see the value in some people needing moral guidance. Not everybody knows how to be a good person, and the freedom to choose your guidance is huge. I even see the value in being allowed to own your own property, and of course, in holding everyone accountable to the same laws. In fact, a lot of the values that are held between individuals within different groups are more similar than separate. But ignoring the questions that arise when we blindly follow a choice of leadership that someone decided for us centuries ago is never going to lead us to the sovereignty that we dream of. Types of leftist movements today, typically more critical of capitalism. The labor movement. This is the collective organization of the working people and consists of the trade union or the labor union movement. It can be considered an instance of class conflict, and the group campaigns for higher wages, better working conditions, fair treatment, and the implementation of labor laws. Focused intent through collective bargaining and strikes. Parties advocating for labor rights such as Social Security and the welfare state are typically called the Labour Party in English speaking countries, a Social Democratic Party in Germanic and Slavic countries, Socialist Party in Romance countries, and at times a Workers' Party. Typically, these movements campaign to replace capitalist ownership and instate worker/consumer operatives and other types of cooperative ownership. Wikipedia contributors 2019 J. Socialism. Characterized by the social ownership of the means of production, in most countries, socialism is a standard left wing ideology. Similar to types of capitalism, types of socialism can vary. They tend to vary upon the role of the market in planning and resource allocation, as well as the structural management of organizations. In market socialism, the use of monetary prices factor markets and sometimes profit motives remain. At times in accordance with the trade unions, other times critical of them. Wikipedia contributors 2019 just like with my description of capitalism, I will ask you to understand nuance and not take my simplification as an oversight. Anarchism. This ideology seeks to abolish all institutions that help perpetrate authority, coercion, or hierarchy, with their primary targets being state and capitalist. The intent is to replace the state with a stateless society and voluntary free associations, no private ownership. Sometimes described as a libertarian wing of the socialist movement or libertarian socialism, anarchists tend to employ a range of approaches to achieving social change. Typically, they are described as either evolutionary or revolutionary, with the evolutionary approach favoring gradual and nonviolent change, and the revolutionary approach seeking to destroy oppressive states and institutions. Wikipedia contributors 2019 H. Communism. The main goal of this ideology is to create a socio-economic order focused on common ownership of the means of production, distribution, and exchange that allocates based on need. Communism is a part of the broader socialist movement, like how many things fall under capitalist or anti capitalist, socialist or anti socialist. I'm learning about this at the same time as I write this, which is always the intention of my writings. Communists seek self governance, but often disagree on what means with which to reach it. Variants of communism include Marxism and Leninism. They believe that there are two social classes under capitalism: the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, the working and owning class, respectively. Essentially, the communist revolution would put the working class in power, establishing common ownership and moving society towards a socialist mode of production. Wikipedia 2018. Marxism. Marxism is an attempt to understand class relations and social conflict. The approach views class struggle as the driving force in historical change. Marxism puts forward at the base of its argument that the ruling class, owning the means of production, exploits the working class who must sell their labor to survive. After Karl Marx died, his ideas have been repeatedly elaborated and adapted upon by many theorists and political movements which completely diversified the surrounding conversations. Leninism is an offshoot and developed after Vladimir Lenin's death. Variations of Marxism have developed that are critical of socialism with a focus on aspects such as culture, philosophy, and individual liberty. In the end, the diversification means there isn't really a single definitive Marxist theory. Wikipedia contributors 2019 C. Leninism. The Leninist vanguard party's function is to provide political consciousness to the proletariat and overthrow capitalism. The Communist Manifesto is where Leninist revolutionary leadership is based. The Bolsheviks viewed history through the framework of dialectical materialism, which emphasizes the importance of real-world conditions. Wikipedia contributors 2019e. The issue with a lot of these parties, however, is that they become the very thing they sought to overthrow. The real revolution comes from reciprocal care and the efforts to get to know one another as people. Syndicalism. This is another labor movement that seeks to unionize workers through industrial unionism. Through strikes and other forms of direct action, the eventual goal is to be in control of the means of production and the economy through social ownership. An asset belongs to society rather than the individual or the groups in it. There were several major syndicalist organizations across France, Spain, Germany, the United States, Canada, and more. Wikipedia contributors 2021. Pros and cons / questions. Number 1, if the means of production and the assets belong to the people, does this mean that anyone has an irrevocable right to reside there? And if someone does something horrible in the eyes of society, does that mean that their housing can be removed as a tool of punishment? I see a lot of potential issues here. While the working class deserves paths and avenues with which to protect themselves from exploitation, there's a lot of room for misinterpretation, which of course that takes place in any ideology. I'm just attempting to be equally credible by breaking down the potential flaws and the upsides to each. The focus here seems to be putting power back to the people. Just because they didn't mention family values or other such items doesn't mean that leftists don't value those things. It seems more likely that while they value those things, they don't value them above building a world where it is safe and sensible to bring a child into. The logical first step is, of course, to make sure that we can take care of the number of people we currently have within our society. And when we choose to ignore those who are starving, we are willingly recognizing that we prioritize potential life over pre existent life. At which point, we realize anyone can be made vulnerable by the ruling class, and that it is our job to first make our communities livable before trying to break down any sort of structure that might not benefit us. Summary. All in all, I think people will fight because some people just want to fight. Regardless, I don't think that any one ideology holds the undiluted truth about the way the world should function, because that's always going to look different to each person. I think the best option is truly just to let every individual live as they wish and try to go about your life in the meantime. The laws should hold people accountable, but in a lot of ways they don't. Ultimately, a guidebook isn't going to stop a murderer from killing, and a difference in political structure isn't going to stop a good person from being kind. Take from that what you will. I'm just trying to make sense of the world as a young person. With all of that being said, my references will be in the Patreon and Substack links in the description, as well as please like and subscribe.